Kim is originally born in Seoul, in Korea. His family migrated to Sydney in '93. He completed his education in Australia and has a PhD in life cycle engineering from University of New South Wales. During the research, he investigated the impact of changing technologies on product functionality, resulting in economic and environmental impacts throughout the whole product life cycle to develop a more pragmatic design assessment method. So in 2014, he joined Suez Australia, a global waste management and water treatment services company, working in both technical and operational role in municipal solid waste processing, including plastic and project delivery in waste processing infrastructure. He had a brief break from the waste industry in 2017-18 while working at an industrial IoT startup for digitization project in the manufacturing sector. Having seen where actual waste end up and the current state of the art in waste processing, he is now more passionate about solving the end of life issues of modern day life cycle. So let's welcome Dr. Kim.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for this invitation to talk about the plastic waste issues and what we are doing at the Alliance to End Plastic Waste. I'd like to start by giving you some context into the numbers that we are dealing with. So currently, the world produces 380 million tons of plastic waste per year. And today, only 70% is collected for recycling. But in actual fact, only 15% is being recycled. And you might already have heard that quite a lot of that actually ends up in ocean every year, and that equates to 11 million tons of plastic going into the ocean. And we're expecting the plastic production to double by 2040, which means we're going to have 3 times the amount of plastic waste leakage into the environment. But at the same time, it's a big opportunity because although it's a big economic challenge, if we manage it properly, it would generate more than 120 billion US dollars of value in the marketplace. And just to put that into perspective, what does actually 11 million tons of plastic waste look like? If we were to stack 11 million tons of plastic waste on top of each other, it would be equivalent to 48 One World Trade Center worth of plastic waste flowing into the ocean every year. I make this comparison because when we say a ton of waste or ton of plastic waste, it's very hard to picture what that looks like. And just a simple calculation of volume and density, and just using the average values of plastic waste, that's how much is actually ending up in the ocean. And currently, many organizations, both NGOs and companies, are making commitments to make a change to improve this recycling. But it's still a big challenge because even if we were to meet the current demand on the recycling issue, because we're expecting the volume to grow to 29 million tons in year 2040, we will still have an increased problem. And it's a challenge because currently post-consumer recyclates is only utilized to only 2% by brand companies today. And they're targeting to use at least 25% by 2025. So there is a huge gap to address this issue. And I'd like to give you just an overview of what we are doing at the Alliance and what our vision is. The Alliance to End Plastic Waste was formed back in 2019 as a community of global companies across the plastic value chain. And the purpose was to build an organization that will actually act now and in a collective action across the value chain. And we want to do projects that's actually concrete in delivering results. So we are not a think tank. It's not that we publish policies or do, papers on the plastic issue, but we actually do real projects on the ground. So currently we have around 70 member companies plus supporter network across the full value chain of the plastic value. And that's what's unique and advantageous for Alliance to End Plastic Waste, because we go from the resin producers to the converters that actually make the plastic products, either packaging or otherwise. And we also have waste management companies, and as well as the brand owners that utilize these products. We also have supporter network through the consultancy companies, as well as development agency and economic funds that help us get there. So how we use our funding is divided into 4 different areas. First one is infrastructure, where we allocate the most funding because that demands the most amount of money to develop projects, the actual infrastructure that needs to go with delivering a project and managing the project on the ground. We also invest in innovation, but I'd just like to point out that we don't do pure R&D type of science-based innovation, but what we like to focus on is scaling up technologies or ideas that's actually close to commercialization by de-risking that final step in going into the market. And we also do a little bit of activities in education and cleanup. So we do societal education in terms of schools, students, as well as doing cleanup activities in high leakage areas. And when we develop solutions, this is the approach that we take. The solution needs to be sustainable. That's both economically and environmentally sustainable. But we also want to make sure that it's very easily scalable. And what we mean by that is both in volume and the ease of solution that we can replicate into other regions, because then you can have a very quick impact and large impact if it's easy to translate that solution across different regions. Thirdly, we want to make the solution catalytic. And what we mean by that is by making the solution attractive economically, we can attract funding from the investment markets so that it catalyzes extra funds to make those projects grow. And we're always striving to develop solutions that's circular, although that is a challenge because everyone will recognize that a circular solution is not a quick issue that can be solved tomorrow, but it's a long-term process. So we take all those things into consideration when we design our projects and make attempt to strive for the most optimal solution for each project. In terms of geographical coverage, most of our funding is focused on Asia Pacific because that is the highest leakage areas. But nevertheless, we also spend our funding in other regions like Europe, North America, South America, as well as Africa and Middle East, because from the European and American perspective, there's quite a lot of solutions that we can develop from a circular solution perspective, whereas the Asia and Africa perspective, there's quite a lot of collection and infrastructure building activities. So as a snapshot, that's our global coverage of our current projects. We have over 35 projects underway. And these projects are divided into different investment themes. So what we refer to them as engaging cities, which is developing infrastructure and basic collection network to enable the collection and recycling activities in that market. Creating value for recyclers refers to adding value to the recyclers so that it's actually attractive for recycling companies and downstream, and then coming back to the resin producers or the packaging producers so they can utilize those recyclers. We're also investing in advanced recycling and recovery solutions. So that's actually looking into either chemical or advanced mechanical sorting and recycling processes, because currently, although we are doing as I mentioned, doing a lot of collection, 70% collection, in actual fact, only 10-15% is being utilized in recycling. So we want to develop the current technological boundaries further to explore what is possible. And then we have the design for circularity, where we look into product designs and looking into the adoption of design guidelines published by different organizations to see how that's actually affecting down the value chain and what it means in terms of the impact on the actual collection and the use of that, as well as how the brands can reutilize those recyclates in their products and processes. And finally, we have societal behavior, because the market behavior or consumer behavior plays a big role. Because if we don't do the right thing, and if we keep contaminating the waste stream, then it becomes very costly and very difficult to recycle these. And I'll give you examples later on, but it plays a much bigger role than you would realize. In terms of achieving the gaps in circular economy, we've identified 6 circularity gaps, and you've got design, data, alignment, and quantity, quality, and affordability. So as I mentioned, design is around the product design, but also you need to consider from a systematic perspective. What I mean by that is, just because your product is recyclable doesn't mean it's going to be recycled. And what you need to make sure is that you have the infrastructure in the marketplace to collect that waste and then sort that waste and recycle that and put it back into the value chain. So it's a system design issue more than just the product design. And that's the system thinking and the perspective that needs to go into design a system in the market. And what's important to recognize is that currently, due to globalization, we are such an interconnected market. Just because you improve the design and the infrastructure in one country, it doesn't mean it's going to solve everything, because some things are manufactured in one country, distributed around the world, consumed in another location, but the collection needs to be done locally. So there's quite a lot of complexities involved in addressing the manufacturing, the distribution, and consumption. Also, there is that data where if you don't know where your sources are at and what sort of composition you're dealing with, what sort of different plastic types you're dealing with, then it's very difficult to design your recycling solutions. One example would be, as you're dealing with a mixed plastic waste, it's always very difficult to recycle a heterogeneous waste mix. And if you have 50%, for example, a PET bottle and 50% polyethylene packaging, if you mix the two, then it's actually not good for either one of recycling operation. So that's why it's very important to understand what it is that you're dealing with so that you can design your systems accordingly. And in terms of alignment, this is where across the value chain becomes important. You need to be aligned through the value from the resin producers all the way to waste management, back to the resin producers or the converters, so that everyone can agree on a set of recyclate specification, the designs, and so forth, so that it works in harmony together. When we jump to quantity, that refers to basic collection and processing, because if you can't collect it in the first place when the waste is generated, you can't do anything. So it's very critical that you have access to the feedstock so that you can actually do something with that. And once you have that, you need to be able to sort into the grades that is required for the offtake to reach that quality. And right now, the fit for use recyclates is very difficult to find. And you would see, I'm not sure if you have seen, but in the news, there was a report that PET recyclates just 1 or 2 years ago was actually much, much cheaper. But due to the demand, everyone wanting the recyclate should because of the regulatory requirements and so forth, the PET recycling pricing has doubled in the last 2 years. And there's finally the affordability gap. The recyclers needs to be affordable to be able to make economic sense for the value chain to adopt the reuse and substitution of that. If it's too expensive, then they will revert back to the virgin polymers. So in achieving a circular economy, we go by the waste hierarchy, where the first approach should be to reduce our waste production, if you can call it. So to prevent waste is better than actually trying to reuse and recycle in the first place. But if reducing is not an option, then we want to look into reuse options. Can we use multiple times of a certain product to extend that life and prevent that from going into the waste stream? And after that, we look into recycling operation. So it can be a combination of mechanical, chemical, and the collection and sorting infrastructure that needs to go with it to enable that recycling operation. And below that, then we go into recovery, where basic recovery of calorific value by means of waste to energy. But this is more for developed nations where all the infrastructure is there to enable such recovery of energy. But if that can't be done, then at least we can have a managed landfill to capture it and prevent it from going into the environment, whether it's just on land or the ocean. It becomes a major environmental problem when it's actually leaking into the environment, as you saw previously. So I'll go through some of the projects that we are doing at the Alliance. And this is an example of the quantity gap that we are addressing in Bali. It's called Project Stop. And we've partnered with the city of Jembrana to build a basic collection, sorting, and recycling solution. And we've learned quite a lot through this program, because in order to be able to collect waste in a region that had no collection system at all, it was very, very challenging to change the mindset. So that introduced that societal behavior and change in people's mind, that they can't just throw out into the dump or in the open area, but to have it collected and stored at home. And when the collection, as you see the photo there, the tricycle comes, that they actually dispose in the right way. The project serves 150,000 people in that region. And what you find is that even though we are focused on plastic waste, people aren't going to just segregate plastic and then throw the rest, what we call municipal solid waste, MSW, elsewhere. And what we offered was we will collect everything, and then we sort out the plastic waste for further recycling. So Jembrana is in Bali, serving 150,000 people. And the project budget was around $4.5 million. And we have plans to scale up this solution across different regions in Indonesia so that we can serve more people there. And as you see, it becomes very challenging, because to scale up from 150,000 people to 6.5 million, the cost of that jumps significantly. And this is where I mentioned about the catalytic funding and developing a sustainable model so that it's actually recycling operations are attractive. Another example is that data gap. At the Alliance, what we've done is we developed a database online where we can store and track all the different information about the waste generation by each country, both looking at MSW and plastic waste, because that's all ties in with household waste flows. And we've also mapped out different waste processing infrastructure capacities in that region. And one of the big challenges in doing this kind of exercise is it's very easy to collect data and put it into a system so that you can track it. But it's the data governance and validating that data. And what we found is, for example, in Indonesia, even for one city, we had about 7 data points of waste generation for one region. And that number was actually ranging from 2 million to 7 million. So you can see then you need to understand what are the methodologies that they use to collect this information and what is the scope and boundary of that data to be able to decide which data is actually the right one to use. So in an era where internet and computer access to data is very easy, actual use of that and validation, it's a much harder task to do. So just wanted to point out the fact that understanding this data issue is more challenging than we realized. And yeah. The third one is resonate with a company called CIDC. So CIDC is actually a concrete manufacturer. And what we found is that concrete actually uses quite a lot of polymer in the concrete mix. And through testing of substituting in plastic waste into the concrete, they've actually found they can replace up to 15% of traditional aggregate, so sand. And they've done a whole host of product testing to ensure that the functionality is not compromised. And what they've achieved is that by introducing the plastic into the concrete mix, it's actually lighter weight and has better insulation properties. And they can use it in both precast blocks and poured concrete. And this project was done in South America and Costa Rica, where they are processing 24,000 tons per year across 2 sites. And the beauty of this project was they set up the plastic collection facility right next to the concrete facility to reduce the logistics cost. And they were utilizing quite a lot of ocean plastics washing up on shores. And so it has a double effect of cleaning up the environment as well as improving the concrete product. Next one is Holy Grail 2.0. So this is utilizing digital watermarks to achieve intelligent sorting. So Holy Grail actually started through Ellen MacArthur Foundation, where it was proposed that if we were able to mark the products, the consumer products, with invisible codes, so we can recognize and sort those fractions, that we can actually achieve a higher granularity of sorting. And this will actually bring about a big step change in recycling, because it addresses the quality gap of not having the right fit-for-purpose recyclates. And what the Alliance has done is we funded the second phase, Holy Grail 2.0 phase, where we were scaling up to commercial operation level to produce the recyclates and sort them in commercial production speed. And how it is done is it uses imperceptible codes on the packaging. So to the naked eye, it won't be visible, but the optical sorters will actually identify, and each manufacturer will actually store this information on a database. So it's like similar to your QR codes. And when the product is scanned, it will tell you all the attributes, such as who it was manufactured by, the stock keeping unit, what sort of type of plastic was used in making this packaging, whether it's multi-layer, and whether it's food application or non-food. And this will address one of the biggest challenges in sorting, because, for example, if we take food or non-food example, regulators are very stringent on the sources of your recyclates. And if you can demonstrate that you're using food packaging plastic sources back into your value chain, it alleviates those concerns, as well as it allows traceability and full circularity of those fractions. So right now, we are going into the adoption phase where we're working with a whole host of companies, from brand owners to recyclers, to enable the adoption of these technologies. And finally, we also host and support innovation through incubating startups. So we work through this platform called Plug and Play. And this platform invites all the startups in the market that's addressing, and what we do is we put out the theme or the project ideas, and where people come with the new ideas to scale up their operation. And through this platform, we actually identified many different projects, and I'd like to just present to you one project that I'm working on. Is called Upcycling. And this entity identified that there's quite a lot of leakages in Indonesia of low value mixed plastic waste. Just going back to the Holy Grail, when you have very high quality, highly sorted granular fractions, then you can actually create the demand for resin producers or packaging producers to offtake those materials. But after you do all the sorting, you're actually left with low value, mixed, highly contaminated waste fractions that no one really wants. And typically this will end up in either landfill or waste to energy if it's available. And Up actually
sorry, Prof. I think you're muted.
Yeah, you're accidentally muted, Seung.
Can you hear me now? Sorry about that. I'm not sure what happened. Where was I? Oh, okay. So this Australian company developed a new technology where they claim to be able to process just mixed waste. And that's quite unheard of in the plastic recycling business because everybody wants homogeneous products. So right now, we are actually going through the feasibility of testing this equipment from technical perspective, as well as operationally to roll this out in Indonesia. And it has a huge potential because it can divert what will actually end up in the environment or landfill and produce usable products such as eco-planks or curb drains. So you see the pictures there for applications such as building sheds, pavement, and plastic bollards, and so forth. And it will have huge implications across the globe because everyone will actually have hard to recycle residual plastic waste. So right now, but I need to point out that because it's a mixed plastic waste stream, it does fluctuate in quality depending on your feedstock. Then it becomes challenging to control the structural or mechanical properties of this. So they are considering for non-structural application, but still divert these waste from the environment. So how it works is you can take a mixed bale of plastic, it goes through the equipment, and then subsequently go through extrusion process into a mold to make those products. And you can do car park bumpers, plastic bricks, planks, for use in the construction and infrastructure industry. So we're expecting to get final feasibility test done in the next coming months. So it will be very interesting how the results actually show. So just to conclude, plastic waste requires combination of solutions. It's not just we can address everything by reducing or reusing. It takes combination. I recall a few months back in the news, Boris Johnson, UK Prime Minister, actually commented that recycling is not very efficient. We just need to reduce. But if you actually look around you in your life, there are so many plastic products that you might not even recognize. And I read an article of an expert in plastic and polymer. As he was traveling, he noticed the person traveling next to him had a sticker on her laptop saying to reduce plastic waste. But little did she realize the backpack she was carrying was made of nylon, which is plastic based. The laptop had ABS, which was plastic based. The water bottle was also plastic based. So if you think about how reliant we are and how many things and how much improvement in the quality of life that we have today, then it's not very easy just to say we're going to reduce and reuse plastic products and solve this problem. So it takes a combination of everything. And we shouldn't be demonizing just the plastic itself, because if you think about it, it's the societal behavior. It's what we do with these products. And the waste problem, the plastic doesn't actually walk itself out of the home and end up in the environment. It's the people who actually litter and don't do the right thing. And right now, we can't just jump to a silver bullet solution where it will solve everything. It will take a combination of the different mechanical, chemical, energy recovery, as well as bio applications as well, to achieve that full circularity. You see the diagram there from Ellen MacArthur. We call it the cascade of recycling solutions. And in the end, we want to make this circular loop as big as possible, as circular as possible, but we will still have this issue of the residuals and hard to recycle fractions that require further treatment, such as chemical processing. And I'd like to just open up the floor for questions and discussion, but yeah, just bear in mind that I believe it is possible. And I've seen the improvements go through in the waste industry as well, and the awareness in the society. So there is great motivation, great drive, and great investments happening. And I think we can all get there if we all do the right thing in all the different areas that's required. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kim. Very interesting overview, as well as what is being done on the ground. I think there's probably a lot of opportunities there that some of these brilliant students are very inspired to perhaps jump in and then participate. Okay, so floor is open for questions, and the first question comes from Elise O'Brien. She's asking, like, how are you processing all that data? Are you working with AI?
It doesn't actually require AI. I'm not too much into the detail of the actual database, but it's just a simple database as you would use in any other type. And it's a query-based, and when you click on the different regions or the different ways, we're not doing any predictive modeling per se at the moment, but there are forecasting not built in, but we're looking into forecasting or modeling to understand the different data gaps rather than AI processing.
Okay, so there's data gap is still a big deal here. And if there's any of you interested in developing based on your training on how to incorporate that plug that gap, well, would be very interesting, right, Seung?
Yeah.
Okay, so more questions coming up on the chat box. I have the next one from Christina Schönleber. She's actually from the APRU organization. Christina, would you like to ask your questions?
Yes, sure. No, sure. I can read it out. No worries. I was wondering. Thank you very much for the presentation, which is really excellent and very interesting. And I'm interested in how, if or how the Alliance also collaborates with partners such as cities, who are one of the main polluters, on some of the initiatives that they do on cleaning up their cities, collecting waste, but also in some of those, such as Surabaya, they do also clean and green initiatives, have been doing for many years, to at the same time increase the green space, specifically within the informal settlements. So I wonder if the Alliance actively collaborates, which helps also changing consumer behavior, basically, as you mentioned in your presentation too. Thank you.
Definitely. We do cleanup activities, but that's actually rather a small portion of what we do, because manual cleanup activities, although it's very much required and it's needed, to have a longevity of solution, we like to focus on infrastructure that delivers long-term solution. And in terms of your second part, engaging with cities.
Yes, so like for example, Surabaya in Indonesia is one of those cities that have been working on this for quite a long time in terms of combining waste and greening, for example, to change basically the urban space.
So we are working with multiple cities. There are projects in the pipeline in the African region as well as Southeast Asia, like Vietnam, Philippines. So that I can't really share those details at the moment because it's in development. But yes, we do work with the cities and with the government agents. And that's actually one of the critical aspects, because if you don't have the city, the governing authorities and the regulators in the countries on board, it's very difficult to roll these systems out. And if, for example, in Singapore, you see in your utility bill the waste collection levy or the fee. But right now in those countries, they have none of that. So there's no funding mechanism to enable such a collection system. And as an organization, we can't just jump in there and start charging a fee without the support of the local authorities. So we do work with all the local authorities. The project in Indonesia, the Project Stop in Jembrana, that's also involving that Regency area. And what you find is that you need to involve the whole geographical region. If you exclude certain parts of that Regency, then people actually feel left out. And when you see some part of those communities paying to have their waste collected, whereas other parts of the society or communities, they're still doing the dumping in open spaces and not paying for it, then it changes the community dynamics and people won't be encouraged to do the right thing. So it takes a combination of all the engagement through the stakeholders and the value chain.
Right, thank you very much.
Yeah, interesting approach there. Obviously, governance is important here at Seung.
Yes.
Part of the ESG, environmental, social, social and governance. So that's their that aspect there being addressed. Okay, the next question is from Jane Seung from Korea University. Jane, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, okay. Thank you. So I was looking at this like on their circular economy, a circular model where there were a lot of like different gaps that needs to be filled. So I was looking at how large scale it is. I'm just wondering if it's actually achievable for like smaller enterprise organizations, possibly those grassroots organizations in developing countries who want to actually do something to change the plastic landscape in their country. Yeah, I'm just wondering how feasible it is for smaller enterprise organizations. Thank you.
Very good question. And I mean, that's something we are still finding challenging as well. And what we are focusing on in those developing countries in smaller regions, as you mentioned, we are focused more on the actual collection and properly managing. If the lack of infrastructure is the issue, then at least the collection and properly managing in a engineered landfill is still a solution. But we are taking a two-pronged approach. So in developing countries, we do tend to focus on the basic infrastructure development to allow for that collection to happen, to allow for potential processing and recycling operation in basic ways so that we prevent it from going into the environment. But it will take time to build the infrastructure and for the economy aspects to make sense, to build in advanced recycling operations. So what we do is we do focus on advanced circular solutions in the developed countries, such as Europe and America, and also like East and North Asia, where there's significant infrastructure already there. And even now in developed countries, it is difficult to demonstrate full circularity. And we are going through a development phase where we want to validate those circularity for given fractions. Because if you look at the European region, although it's highly collected and the recycling rates are much higher, quite a significant volume of that still ends up going to waste to energy facilities for energy recovery, because we don't have, it becomes a chicken and egg story. Like at the moment, the recyclers are saying, if you give me high quality feedstock, I can recycle this. But then someone needs to do the sorting activities, which needs investment, but someone needs to be able to pay for that. So one saying, if you pay me more to sort, then I will build the infrastructure. Whereas the recyclers are saying, if you give me the high quality feedstock, then I'll pay you more for this. And it is a chicken and egg story. And that's where we want to get all the players in the value chain for alignment and have a collaborative approach to develop the circular solution together.
Okay. Is that okay, Jane?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay. All right, we have next question that comes from Christopher Neze Diengu from University of Alberta. Christopher, would you like to ask your question?
Okay, I will do that. Thank you very much. Yeah, so my question is so I think the speaker mentioned that when they collect, I think in one of the projects he cited in Indonesia, he mentioned that when they collect the waste, they collect both the plastic waste and other kinds of waste. So I'm curious about what happens to the other kinds of waste since they are focusing on the plastic waste. Yeah.
The organic part of it, some of them can go to composting, but not all can go. So it is a mix of solutions. So plastic is separated for recycling. Some of the organic fraction will go into composting, but the residual waste becomes very difficult to deal with and will actually go to landfill.
Okay. Then my next question will be, do you think that a decentralized waste management system will be a solution, or do you think that we should still stay with a centralized system whereby the plastic waste are collected and taken to a center, or every household should think of having their own system of managing their waste, maybe at a household level or at a community level, something like that?
That actually depends on the type of waste you're dealing with in the geographical region. Like, for example, if you have very high density living cities, high population, then it's very easy to design high capacity, centralized processing facilities to handle all the different waste. And the waste technologies have actually developed quite far that it can deal with separating quite a diverse mix of waste types. And if you were to individually handle all the different fractions, you're actually increasing your logistics cost as well as your emissions as well. And you need to take that into consideration. But if you, for example, look at Australian case, and when you go to the regional areas, the distances that you need to travel to collect the, let's say, relatively low volume waste, it actually becomes economically not viable to do so. So I think there are many different aspects that you need to take into consideration and design your system accordingly. So right now, Singapore's introducing the reverse vending machine. So that's sort of like a decentralized collection system where people come and put it in for the deposit, and then it gets collected through. But then is it better to process it locally? I would suggest no, because you have all the like small distances and the volumes required to process that centrally. So it won't be one simple answer for everyone. It would depend on the type of waste and the geographic region.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any further questions from the audience? Dr. Kim?
I have some questions.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Kim, for that very interesting presentation. Right off the bat, I agree with you 100% that when it comes to plastics, there is a societal element to it. And frankly, I'm quite glad to see that there is traction, within the community as well as big players who manufacture plastics to actually reconsider alternatives. I have 3 questions, so I just very quickly will jump into it. Now, on the element of societal, I think plastics can be broadly defined into the plastics that we all see and use every day, and some of the unspoken plastics, which are typically like microplastics. Now, how do you think, or what do you think would be a good way to increase the awareness of the use of microplastics in our daily products, and ways that they can actually be reduced more than recycled?
Sorry, so increase the awareness on microplastics?
Yeah. So for example, tire dust is actually a very good example of a microplastic, and all of us drive or take the bus or transport using a vehicle that has wheels, correct? So these are some of the elements of microplastics, or even in your cosmetics, for example, your shampoos or your face wash, it has this microplastics, but not many people talk about it, right? And I think how do we get this conversation going?
I think probably I would suggest that it would be best to tackle it from something that people can relate to and can do something about. I recently attended a webinar on microplastics and microfibers, and I found one really interesting fact that your clothing, which has mixed polymer synthetic fibers in there, and the most of the shedding of the microplastics and microfibers actually happens on the first wash. And the manufacturers of washing machines also looking into this, where they can put the filter in to capture that. And apparently the highest shedding is between 10 and 50 microns. And if we can actually design filters correctly and ask people, consumers, to empty out the filter, then it's something they can do. Whereas tires, because it's in the open, when you're driving, there isn't much you can do in terms of collection of that, right? And I think it's a valid point that we need to address, but I think it's difficult from a societal perspective whether there's something that they can do. So if we start from something that simple things that they can do and reduce their usage, because as you understand, the textile industry is very highly impacting on the environment, both from water usage as well as energy and CO2. And that's also introducing microplastics as well. So that's one of the things that you can do to collect the microplastic. But at the same time, do we really need to follow the fashion trend every single season?
Yeah. Thanks for that, Dr. Kim. I think I agree with you that let's start with what we can do first, the low-hanging fruits, and then we move on to the more difficult one. My second question is a two-part question. The first part is on the project that you've been doing in Bali. Can I ask which year did that project start?
It started about 2 years ago.
Okay. So that is at the peak of the pandemic, correct? So when I think about Bali, I always think about my travels there and it being a very touristy destination. Now, so the second part of the question then would be, now that we have, or rather we're trying to get systems in place for the local community in Bali to one way to reduce or recycle their plastic usage. What do you think the impact of the recovery of the tourism industry and, where we have tourists going over to Bali, do you think this will upset the system that, you have built over the 2 years?
I think there is definitely an element of that. And I think we all agree and that tourist behaviors actually contribute much more than the locals. How you deal with that, I think it's quite diverse and political issue that needs to be addressed holistically. And I would think that now that we've gone through the pandemic and we've seen how much the nature has actually healed itself as well, and people recognize this. So probably a collaborative approach with the government authorities locally to maintain that would be the right approach, I think, because no one organization can handle this alone, and it needs to be handled together with communities. And what you find is that education, especially in the children, actually is more effective than educating adults. And when you do these educational programs to children, it actually prompts them to challenge their parents on how they dispose waste, and it improves the waste behavior much better than trying to educate the adults.
I completely agree with you on that. And I hope in the 2 years, it has ingrained within the local community about the importance, and that can still be carried forward even though we see an increase in tourists arriving at Bali. Maybe there are some systemic changes that have been made that allows the system not to be too perturbed when the tourists come. Okay, very quickly, my last point is on the concrete. Now, concrete for me has always been I don't know how to see it, because when I think about concrete, I compare it to steel as a building block. And whilst concrete have generally a lower life cycle carbon footprint compared to the manufacture of steel, the issue with concrete is its recyclability. Concrete, unfortunately, unlike steel, cannot be recycled. So now, if we are going to add plastics to this concrete, my immediate thought is: are we really going to solve the problem? Because eventually, this concrete is not going to be recycled, and the plastic that is now embedded in the concrete, has come to a final gate, and it's not being. And the problem is not really actually being addressed completely. Do you agree?
Yes and no. I understand your perspective as well, and that's something that's I'm a bit mindful of it also. The fact that but aggregate recycling is possible, but then at the same time, like you said, when it goes to the next application, after that, what happens to that product as well? So in terms of long-term thinking, yes, we need to address that, but my take on this will be is right now you have the immediate issue that we can actually address for the interim, and I think it's buying us time to develop further solution to enable an efficient aggregate recycling solution as well.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kim, for sharing your thoughts with me. I really appreciate it. Yeah.
No problem.
Yeah. Thank you for the questions. I think we have one more question here from Christopher. If there is no one else who's asking other questions. So
Okay.
Christopher.
So I should go ahead?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, good. So I'm asking again, you mentioned that because you mentioned that plastic waste does not leave the house unless the people take it out. So we are the ones that serve as a channel that move the plastic waste to the environment. So I wanted to know, for your organization, Alliance to End Plastic Waste, what are some of the practical steps that you are taking to ensure that people maybe are encouraged to keep the waste to like at a point where they will be recycled? Is there a kind of incentives that you plan to provide to people? Let's say those that collect their waste, let's say you reward them. Because when people are rewarded or when there's an incentive, people want to say, okay, if I'm going to get this, then I will do this. I know it might not be economical, but is there any way you get a support from maybe the government or from your funding organizations that people will be given incentives to help them to have that attitude of keeping their plastic waste so that you come and collect them?
Okay. Well, can I just make clear that we are a registered charity in US. So we don't own any assets. We don't own any infrastructure, nor do we do any lobbying. So I'll just make that clear. But we fund projects that it will improve circularity and recycling of all different plastic waste. In terms of incentivizing behavior, yes, it can be done through multiple channels, such as I mentioned, the reverse vending machine, but that actually sits with the city or the country that's actually doing this. And one of the ways we can support, not just the Alliance, but as a society, is we actually support this type of solution to be rolled out. And another aspect that we are looking into is the reuse model. And we've had project submissions that looks into the different application of reuse, where people are incentivized to use the actual container given to them to buy the products. So one example is like detergents or washing products. They are given a container to use, and when they reuse that to buy the product again, they're given, for example, 10-20% discount on the product rather than buying a whole new product with the container. So that's one of the ways that you could influence behavior. That's done by our project partners, not us, but we are supportive of these good initiatives to improve circularity or reducing plastic waste in all the different aspects, whether it be reuse, reducing, or recycling.
Okay. We have like one last question here from Elise. Elise, would you like to state your question?
Sure, thank you.
One, yeah.
I was just wondering if the Alliance to End Plastic Waste was a foundation. Where is your funding coming from for all of these huge, amazing initiatives?
Yes, so as you saw, we have over 70 member companies, and they pay a membership fee to join the Alliance. And we earmark certain percentage of that funding to do the project. And that's how the Alliance was set up, to actually do projects with that funding.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, sounds good. So I think we only have time for that much, and I am very glad that Dr. Kim actually makes some time today to speak with us. So let's thank Dr. Kim again on the very interesting aspect of plastic waste management from an organization. Thank you, Dr. Kim, and we hope to see you again next semester.
Thanks, Professor Lim. Thank you, everyone.